The 18th of September 1940. Northern France. The fog rolled low over the airfield like a living thing, sliding across the tarmac in long, pale ribbons that blurred lights, swallowed shapes, and made every sound feel distant, hollow, and cold. Mechanics moved with hurried discipline, their boots clicking sharply against the damp concrete, echoing between corrugated hangars streaked with rust and soot. The Luftwaffe operations room glowed with a dim amber haze, the scent of oil, stale cigarette smoke, and wet canvas drifting through its open door as officers leaned over maps spread across a scarred wooden table. A low hum vibrated through the floor, generators, warming Messerschmitts, the restless tension of a morning that felt too still, too silent, too expectant. Across the channel, the approaching dawn carried another kind of threat. On a narrow RAF strip cut into the green expanse of southern England, a lone supermarine Spitfire crouched in the half-light like a polished predator, its wings beaded with dew, its metal skin cool and rigid under the creeping breeze. Ground crew whispered last checks, their voices muffled under the deep, rhythmic tick of a Merlin engine turning over in slow, stubborn breaths. The aircraft shook lightly, hungry for ignition, waiting for the inevitable alarm that everyone sensed was coming. The air smelled of coolant, cold grass, and distant sea spray, but beneath it all lay the metallic scent of machines designed to kill. The pilot, known to his squadron simply as Hale, stood alone beside the Spitfire, gloves tucked under his arm, breath forming faint clouds that drifted upward and vanished. He scanned the sky with the instinctive caution of someone who had seen too many calm mornings detonate into chaos. The horizon was a thin strip of thundercloud stretched over a steel-grey sea. It looked empty. It never was. Inside the Spitfire's cockpit, once Hale climbed in, the world changed. The canopy trapped sound and sharpened it. Switches clicked with firm precision, belts rustled against leather, and the engine's growl deepened into a rising snarl. Vibration thrummed up his legs, into his spine, into the bones of his jaw. The aircraft felt alive, impatient, coiled, alert. Then the scramble bell hammered through the airfield. The suddenness cut through the morning like a blade. Boots pounded against concrete. Someone yelled for clearance. A truck screeched aside in a spray of water. Hale shoved the throttle, and the Merlin roared in full, rattling the entire fuselage. The Spitfire surged forward, wheels slicing through puddles, sending thin arcs of spray flicking into the cold air. Behind him, other fighters were still warming, but his was already rolling, tail lifting, the runway blurring beneath the wheels until friction was gone and he was climbing, rising into the heavy grey that swallowed everything below. At 2,000 feet, the world dimmed. Clouds hung thick like curtains of smoke, drifting in wavering sheets that distorted horizon and depth. Hale leveled out, heartbeat settling into the steady rhythm of trained control. The radio crackled with static, a faint, fracturing hiss layered with clipped instructions from ground control. Formation to his south. High. Fast. Closing. His gloved hand tightened on the stick. Somewhere above the haze, Messerschmitt Bf 109 sliced through the morning, their angular silhouettes cutting dark shapes against the higher, cleaner light. Their engines carried a sharp, serrated tone, higher pitched than the Merlin, colder, almost mechanical in its hunger. They moved like shards of obsidian drifting in formation, unyielding, lethal, methodical. The German pilots were confident after weeks of hammering the coast, confident that the sky was theirs more often than not. Confidence was dangerous. Confidence bred carelessness. Hale climbed alone, slipping through cloud like a spirit rising through smoke. Moisture streaked across the canopy, distorting the outlines of the sun above. The temperature dropped sharply, making the air inside the cockpit bite at the edges of his cheeks and nose. Sweat cooled instantly on his neck. The engine heat fought against the cold, creating a trembling contrast that filled the small space with a kind of electric tension. He broke through the top of the cloud layer into a world of blinding white. The clouds billowed beneath him like a churned sea, spires and mounds of vapor drifting with slow, deceptive grace. Above, the sky was a cold, hard blue. Then he saw them. 4 Messerschmitts, cruising in a loose sweep pattern, sunlight glinting off their sharp noses and yellow cowlings. They were relaxed, too relaxed, flying as though they believed they alone owned the altitude. Hale's Spitfire, still masked by the rising steam of the cloud tops, banked slightly, allowing him to track their path. The Merlin whispered at idle, waiting to be unleashed. Wind hissed along the canopy. Thin vibrations quivered through the wings. Hale eased the nose down. The Spitfire dipped barely enough to gather speed, but not enough to betray itself. The airframe stiffened, the engine note deepened. The Messerschmitts continued their patrol, unaware of the solitary predator slipping into their blind arc. Their flight lead rolled lazily, scanning the horizon with the casual assurance of someone who didn't believe any threat could have reached this altitude so soon. Hale's breathing slowed. The world narrowed to the crosshairs. The wind noise softened into a steady, rushing pulse. The distance closed, 300 yards, 200, 150, his aircraft sinking into the angle of attack with the smooth, precise control of training pushed to instinct. The Messerschmitts drifted into perfect alignment, unaware of the danger being drawn toward them like a blade lifting in silence. Hale pressed the trigger. The Spitfire's wings convulsed with recoil as 8.303 Brownings unleashed a storm of fire that ripped through the morning sky. Tracers stitched a burning path through the air, slamming into the trailing Messerschmitt before the pilot even understood what was happening. The German fighter burst into a spray of black smoke and debris, dropping like a stone into the glowing white cloud layer. The other three scattered instantly, shocked, disordered, scrambling for altitude and angles. Hale pushed the throttle to full. The hunt began. The Spitfire shot upward through the blinding white glare, its wings trembling under the sudden surge of power. The Merlin engine bellowed, a deep metallic roar that vibrated through the airframe as Hale pulled into a climbing turn. The three remaining Messerschmitts were already splitting apart, one rolling hard right, one diving for cloud cover, and one climbing sharply to gain the superior perch every Luftwaffe pilot relied on. Their formation had collapsed in seconds, replaced by the frantic, instinctive scramble of pilots shocked out of routine. The sky above the cloud tops transformed from quiet expanse to a shifting battlefield of shadows, flashes, and rising contrails. Hale's canopy rattled as he swung the Spitfire into a high-angle climb, his harness straps biting into his shoulders as G-force pressed him deep into the seat. The air thinned, the engine strained, and the horizon rolled sideways in a slow, sickening arc. Through the trembling glass, he caught the flicker of silver as the lead Messerschmitt cut across the sun's path. The German pilot dove suddenly, using the glare to hide his movement. Hale shifted, following the shadow's trajectory, but the target vanished into a burst of bright white vapor. A sudden hiss of static snapped through the radio, followed by a clipped frequency burst. Bandits, high 6, fast. It wasn't directed at him specifically, but it cut through the haze like a warning bell. Reinforcements were coming. Somewhere above, somewhere out of sight, more Messerschmitts were converging. He had minutes before the sky shifted irreversibly against him. Clouds exploded around him as he broke through a dense patch of vapor, only to find himself momentarily blind. Moisture streaked across the canopy. The aircraft shook violently, an abrupt drop in pressure. Then the Spitfire burst out the other side, sunlight slicing across the nose just in time for Hale to see a Messerschmitt diving at him from high left. He reacted on instinct. A violent snap roll to the right pulled the Spitfire into a descending spiral, the G-force grinding into Hale's ribs and tightening his breath. The German fighter overshot, slicing past in a blur of dark metal and shimmering heat. Hale leveled for half a second, just long enough to pull the nose up and fire. The tracers missed by inches, streaking behind the German's tail. The Messerschmitt banked hard, its engine screaming as it clawed for altitude, trying to regain the advantage. Hale followed, the hunt dragging both aircraft into a tightening corkscrew climb. The air thinned further. Frost edged the inside of the canopy. Every surface of the Spitfire felt pushed to its limits, strained by forces and speeds that demanded total precision. Above the turning duel, sunlight flared off another descending silhouette. The second Messerschmitt. Hale saw the angle, saw the threat forming in a perfect, deadly arc, and forced the Spitfire into a harsh brake turn. The aircraft groaned, metal skin stretching under the strain. The Germans' burst of cannon fire passed where Hale had been seconds earlier, streaking yellow flashes that disappeared into the cloud sea below. The two Messerschmitts regrouped, tightening their maneuvers, trying to drive Hale downward where cloud concealment could trap him. Their movements were coordinated now, not random panic but cold, disciplined skill. They were Luftwaffe veterans, trained in the aggressive, energy-preserving combat style that had given German pilots their early dominance. They moved like hunters circling prey. But Hale wasn't prey. He dropped the Spitfire into a sudden half-loop, the aircraft inverted for a heartbeat before rolling upright again. The maneuver threw off both Germans. One dove too steeply, the other flared too soon. In that split moment of misalignment, Hale's instincts locked onto the closest target. He lunged. The Merlin thundered as the Spitfire surged forward, closing the gap with lethal speed. Hale squeezed the trigger. The guns chattered in a violent, shuddering rhythm, and a streak of tracers punched into the Messerschmitt's fuselage. The German fighter snapped sideways in a sharp, uncontrolled spin, smoke erupting from its engine cowling. It spiraled downward through the cloud top, vanishing into the white abyss. The radio crackled again, short bursts, distant German chatter on an open frequency. They were calling for reinforcements. Hale knew he had seconds before more fighters arrived. Yet the sky around him was quiet for now, punctuated only by the fading groan of the dying Messerschmitt below. He turned his focus to the last visible threat. The third Messerschmitt circled wide, keeping distance, calculating. Its pilot had abandoned the aggressive dive approach and instead held altitude, high, cautious, waiting for the perfect intercept angle. He was older, more experienced. Every movement was controlled, deliberate. He tracked the Spitfire with the patience of a sniper adjusting for wind. Hale climbed again, pushing the fight upward where visibility sharpened but oxygen thinned. The Spitfire responded with a rising whine, its alloy frame vibrating as it clawed into the open blue. The German followed, matching each change in altitude. The two aircraft wove through the sky in a rising duel, each trying to outmaneuver the other without bleeding too much speed. The cloud deck drifted far below now, a distant, shifting carpet. The cold here was sharper, biting into Hale's gloves, numbing the edges of his fingers. His breath condensed against the mask in silver streaks. Then the fourth Messerschmitt appeared. It rose out of the glare of the sun, silent, small, perfectly aligned behind him. Hale saw the shadow forming on his wing root a split second before the radio cut through with a sharp, tense call-out. "Check your high 6. He rolled instantly. The burst of cannon fire ripped past, shaking the air with its violent percussion. The sky erupted into chaos once more, two Messerschmitts above, one circling far right, the fourth sliding into an attack run. Hale was alone, outnumbered, and seconds from being bracketed in a crossfire. The Spitfire dove. Cloud tops rushed upward. 3 Messerschmitts followed. The sky tightened around him like a closing fist. The descent slammed Hale into his harness as the Spitfire tore downward in a near-vertical dive, the altimeter spinning with a frantic urgency. The wind shear screamed against the canopy, a rising howl that merged with the Merlin's strained roar. The clouds hit him like a wall, thick vapor swallowing the aircraft, coating the glass in beaded streaks as visibility collapsed to almost nothing. Shadows flickered through the whiteout. Shapes dissolved as quickly as they appeared. The world became a blinding, tumbling blur. The Messerschmitts followed him into the storm. Their engines echoed through the fog in layered bursts, one sharp and high-pitched, another deeper, more guttural. The sound bounced unpredictably, distorted by moisture, altitude, and compression shock. Hale couldn't see them, but he could hear them hunting, closing, adjusting their angles with the cold precision of men trained to kill without hesitation. The Spitfire's wings trembled violently. Moisture condensed on the inner canopy in thin trembling beads. The dive was pushing the airframe to its structural edge. He eased the throttle, then snapped it forward again, forcing the Merlin to modulate power just enough to destabilize the German's pursuit solution. The air pressure around him shifted, buffeting the aircraft with chaotic turbulence. A shadow streaked past his left side, a Messerschmitt plunging too quickly, nearly overshooting. Hale felt the tremor of displaced air ripple through the cockpit like a sudden slap. The cloud density lightened for a heartbeat. A thin pocket opened, a corridor of pale light breaking the suffocating white. Hale seized the chance. He rolled sharply left, then pulled into a climbing arc, bleeding speed in exchange for maneuverability. The Spitfire clawed upward into clearer air, vapor trailing off its wingtips in twisting spirals. The first Messerschmitt burst from the clouds behind him. The cannon flash glowed faintly through the haze, then the shells tore past, slicing the air with violent whistles. One round clipped the Spitfire's tailplane, sending a harsh shudder through the entire fuselage. Hale felt the yaw immediately, a subtle, dangerous pull to the right. The aircraft was wounded, not crippled. He forced the rudder pedal down hard to compensate. He reached open sky again, bright, cold, vast. The 3 Messerschmitts emerged in staggered bursts, the sun gleaming off their angular frames. They were closer now. Too close. Their coordinated formation tightened into an attack triangle, one climbing for altitude advantage, one sliding low to cut Hale's escape, one remaining directly behind on his 6. Hale pulled the Spitfire into a hard left brake. His vision blurred from the G-force, edges darkening, chest compressing. The Messerschmitts responded instantly. The rear fighter stayed glued to him, adjusting its angle with meticulous precision. The low fighter began rising, moving to trap him in a vertical pincer. He needed separation. He shoved the throttle to full and dove again, this time only 50 feet, just enough to bait the closest German into following with too much speed. Then Hale snapped into a snap roll to the right, dropping the Spitfire into a near-stall maneuver that bled energy violently. The Messerschmitt shot past him, momentum carrying it forward like a thrown blade. Hale inverted and dove behind it. The German pilot tried to correct, but Hale had already closed within lethal range. He fired. The Brownings erupted in a synchronized, violent hum that pulsed through the Spitfire's wings. Tracers tore into the Messerschmitt's fuselage. Black smoke blossomed from its engine, the aircraft wobbling as its propeller juddered to a stop. It pitched downward in a steep, uncontrolled drop, disappearing into the cloud deck below like a broken arrow. 2 left. No time to breathe. Hale yanked the nose up just as the second Messerschmitt dropped on him from above. Cannon shells ripped through the air behind him, flashes of yellow fire tinging the edges of his vision. One burst detonated close enough to shake the cockpit with a concussive thud. Metallic fragments ricocheted off the Spitfire's underside. The vibration rattled through Hale's teeth. He rolled, dove, climbed, anything to break the German's lock. The Messerschmitt stayed with him. Its pilot was skilled, disciplined, and ruthless. Below them, the clouds parted in drifting sections, revealing fragments of earth, fields, roads, dark forests shaped like spreading ink. The airspace was tightening. Hale could feel the rhythm of the fight shifting dangerously in the Germans' favor again. They were working together, pressing from different angles, forcing him to react on instinct and reflex alone. He spotted the opening. A thermic column rising off the sun-warmed cloud layer distorted the air ahead, perfect for disrupting a gun solution. Hale dove through it. The turbulence hammered the Spitfire, jolting it sideways. The Messerschmitt followed, its aim faltering for half a second. Half a second was enough. Hale pulled into a full-power vertical climb, the Merlin scream resonating through the cockpit. The sudden maneuver caught the German fighter off guard, leaving him temporarily low on energy. Hale rolled over the top of the climb and dropped onto the Messerschmitt's high 6. The German tried to bank away, but the Spitfire was already descending with predatory precision. The Brownings opened fire again. Metal shredded. A wingtip burst into flame. The Messerschmitt spun wildly, trailing smoke in a twisting, dying corkscrew. It vanished into the cloud deck with its flames still spiraling. 1 left. The final Messerschmitt pulled high, far higher than the others had dared. The pilot climbed until the sunlight haloed his fighter, using the glare to mask his silhouette. He held position at the top of the engagement zone, calculating, watching, waiting for Hale to commit to any move that would reveal his weakness. Hale drifted in the lower airspace, engine humming, wings trembling from earlier stress. He kept his eyes locked upward, scanning the blinding halo. The German had altitude, energy, sunlight, and positional advantage. A perfect trap. Then Hale did something unexpected. He climbed straight toward the sun. The Messerschmitt dove instantly, falling into the textbook ambush pattern, sun behind him, speed advantage, nose down, guns ready. Hale didn't brake. He climbed faster. The German pilot adjusted, confused for a fraction of a second. Too late. Hale rolled inverted, pulling the Spitfire downward into a tight, descending corkscrew. The maneuver forced the Messerschmitt to correct mid-dive, bleeding energy, overshooting his angle, slipping slightly out of the perfect firing line. The Spitfire swung beneath him like a pendulum of steel and fire. Hale squeezed the trigger. The final burst struck the Messerschmitt's underside. Smoke erupted across its fuselage. Fire trailed from the cowling. The aircraft pitched violently, rolled, then plunged downward. It disappeared into the clouds. The sky went silent. For the first time in nearly 10 minutes, Hale was alone. Below the clouds, German reinforcements were rising fast. The Spitfire drifted above the cloud layer like a solitary ember suspended over a vast, shifting sea. The sky looked clean, too clean, its silence sharpened by the distant thrum of engines gathering below. Hale steadied his breathing. Sweat cooled inside his gloves, and the metallic tang of oxygen filled the mask. His aircraft vibrated with the accumulated stress of the fight, a faint tremor in the tailplane, a subtle misalignment in the rudder pedal, the left wing carrying a slight but persistent drag. The Merlin idled with a deep, uneven throb, its earlier fury replaced by a tired rumble. He banked slowly, climbing just enough to pierce the upper air where sunlight glinted off the curved canopy. Vapor curled away from the wingtips in thin ribbons. The sky remained deceptively beautiful, painted in soft hues of pale blue and white. Yet beneath that fragile calm lay the unmistakable sound of multiple engines, Messerschmitts rising, closing, moving like a swarm preparing to break through the clouds. Hale knew he could not stay. He dipped the Spitfire's nose gently, slipping back into the cover of the cloud deck. The temperature plunged instantly, fog enveloping the cockpit in swirling grey. Moisture streaked across the canopy. The engine hum echoed strangely in the vapor, muffled and distorted. Visibility evaporated into a world of diffuse light and shifting shadows. The aircraft descended in a slow, controlled glide. Hale kept one hand firm on the stick, the other hovering near the throttle, ready to react if any silhouette emerged out of the haze. The earlier battle left a resonance in his bones, every muscle anticipating impact, every nerve poised for another cannon flash. Even in the deep fog, the sky felt tense, charged, alive with unseen threats. Then he broke free beneath the clouds. The world returned in a muted wash of greens and browns. Fields stretched outward in long patchwork swaths. Thin roads cut across hedgerows like pale scars. Smoke drifted from distant barns recently hit by earlier raids. The light down here was dimmer, filtered through thick cloud layers that pressed low and heavy against the landscape. Hale skimmed above the treetops, the Spitfire weaving through scattered wisps of vapor lingering close to the ground. The aircraft felt different now, less like a predator, more like a wounded animal pushing through instinct alone. He checked the instruments, oil pressure low but stable, temperature spiking then settling, ammunition nearly spent. Fuel was workable but shrinking quickly. A flicker of shadow crossed the right wing. Hale's heart hammered once, hard, before his eyes confirmed it, a pair of slow-moving bombers far below, heading east, unaware of him. No escorts. No threat. Just shapes drifting over farmland battered by the season's battles. He watched them pass without adjusting course. He had no ammunition to waste, no time, and no altitude to gamble. The Spitfire leveled out toward the coastline. Clouds thickened again ahead, hanging low and heavy like smoke rising from a dying fire. He entered them without hesitation. The cockpit dimmed, air pressure humming in low vibrations as the aircraft cut through the grey world. The coastline appeared suddenly, jagged cliffs rising from the mist like the edge of a colossal stone fortress. Waves hammered against the rock, producing faint, muffled echoes that reached even this height. Hale turned inland, following memory and instinct rather than instruments. Static hissed on the radio. No voices. No guidance. Only occasional pops of interference, as though the air itself was trembling from distant clashes he could not see. Minutes stretched. The engine coughed once, a sharp, metallic stutter that rattled through the fuselage. He adjusted the mixture gently. The Merlin steadied, but its tone deepened, carrying the unmistakable fatigue of a machine forced beyond its intended limits. Every vibration felt heavier now, each passing gust pushing the wounded plane slightly off balance. Then, through the thinning cloud, the faint outline of home airfield markings appeared, dark lines, muddy tracks, and scattered personnel looking skyward. The ground crew was already running. A fuel truck reversed hastily. A signal flare hissed upward, blooming red before fading. Hale lowered the gear. One wheel locked cleanly. The second hesitated, then snapped down with a violent clunk. The aircraft shuddered in response. He aligned with the runway. Crosswinds tugged at the Spitfire, pushing it sideways. Hale corrected gently, refusing to overreact. His arms trembled from the earlier fight, his neck stiffened from the strain of constant scanning. But his movements remained steady, calm, economical, precise. The wheels touched the ground with a heavy thud. The landing gear groaned, rubber skidding along wet pavement. The aircraft bounced once, hard, then settled. Brakes hissed. The Merlin sputtered as Hale eased the throttle back, its once mighty roar collapsing into a ragged cough and finally falling silent with a long, low sigh. The canopy slid open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of fuel, smoke, and damp earth. Ground crew swarmed around the aircraft, hands gripping the wings, shouts muffled by the ringing in Hale's ears. Tools clattered. Boots splashed in puddles. Someone reached up and steadied him as he climbed out, his gloves streaked with soot and oil. Only then did the scale of the damage reveal itself. Bullet holes ribboned the left wing. The tail was torn along its edge. Panels rattled loosely along the fuselage. The propeller tips were scorched, and a thin trickle of oil leaked down the underside in slow, viscous drops. The Spitfire looked as though it had clawed its way out of a storm of fire, and survived by inches. Word spread quickly. Officers gathered, some silent, some stunned, all watching Hale and the aircraft that should not have returned. Technicians circled it with shaking heads. One traced a finger over a cannon strike that had missed severing the control line by barely a thumb's width. Another stared at the fuel meter, muttering under his breath at how little remained. Reports drifted in over the next hour from listening stations and intelligence intercepts. German units confirmed 4 Messerschmitt losses, all within the same narrow window of time. By 1 aircraft. No one believed it at first. Even after the Spitfire's damage was inspected, even after the gun barrels were checked, even after pilot accounts from German radio chatter were transcribed, there was disbelief. Confusion. Silence. A single Spitfire had torn into a formation, dismantled it, held its own against reinforcements, and returned through cloud, fire, and sky with the precision of a machine pushed beyond reason. Commanders studied the aircraft long after Hale had walked away alone, boots leaving faint wet prints across the tarmac. They examined every hole, every scar, every twisted panel. They understood what it meant. One pilot, one machine, one isolated moment, yet an impact that would ripple through strategy, confidence, and the fragile balance of air superiority. And when the sun dipped behind the clouds, sinking the airfield into a cold, muted half-light, the Spitfire sat motionless in the center of the runway, silent, battered, resolute. A quiet reminder of the brutal, unforgiving sky. And of the man who had returned from it.